First, let me apologize for having to have an overflow room, but it's a law school and we do enforce the fire code. So I guess there's an advantage to come early. There are still seats, though, and I hope that people are still being let in to fill those seats. My name is Ross Sandler. I'm have the honor of being a professor of law at New York Law School, and I welcome you to the 129th City Law Breakfast. The breakfasts we're now in our 21st year. We are very fortunate to have longtime sponsors, Consolidated Edison, Verizon, and the law firm of Greenberg Traurig. Let me give them a hand. They've been wonderful in sponsoring. And for this breakfast, we have Castellanos and Fink, a special sponsor, and we thank them. I also like to thank them. I also like to thank, we have started a new thing where these are free breakfasts, but if you like to pay, we encourage that. And in order to reward those who actually voluntarily paid, you get a gold star on your name tag. So we should be very thankful for the gold star people. I also like to say that there are, for those of you who are motivated, there are also opportunities to contribute forms on the table. I'd like to thank Brian Kasuba, our Associate Director of the Center for New York City Law, and our staff of Lillian Valley, Santiago, Jesse Deno, Michael Twomey, and Jessica Bronstein for the help of putting these breakfasts together. Now I'd like to call to the podium President Dean Anthony Crowell.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome. We are so excited to have you. Disappointed that there's an overflow room, but it's an embarrassment of riches. These breakfasts are so popular these days. It's really wonderful. We have so many past and present high-ranking officials in the room, and I just want to thank you all for being here and your commitment to public service. There are too many to name, but I do see our TLC Commissioner, Meera Joshi, here. I want to welcome her and everyone else. So thank you all for being here. As we continue to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the Center for New York City Law, we also celebrate our 125th anniversary of the law school. And really there's no one I can think who's better to be here during our celebration year than Commissioner Bratton. We're so honored to have him here. And as New York's law school, we have such a close relationship with the city's police department, starting all the way back to our first graduating class in 1892, in which a future police commissioner would be one of the first graduates. That NYLS graduate's name was Avery D. Andrews, and he served on the 4-member board of commissioners that ran the police department, and which also had a future New York governor and U.S. president serving as the president of the board. That was Teddy Roosevelt. And as one of the first schools in the United States to offer an evening program for working professionals, we've always been proud to welcome several members of the NYPD in each of our classes, and that's something that continues to this very day. And Commissioner, you should know that NYPD members enrolled here are always among the hardest working, most dedicated, and most successful students. And so it's not surprising considering their incredible public service. And we have a group of our NYPD members who are students at the law school right at this table here. I want to give them a shout out. They include Joseph Redner, Michael Bellera, and Patrick Lindy. So thank you for being here. So Ross Sandler is going to give a more full introduction of the commissioner, but this is his second tour of duty, and he's no stranger to challenging times, and his resume as an innovative law enforcement leader is unparalleled, and he's found success wherever he has gone. And Commissioner Bratton has done such an incredible amount in the first 2 years back on the job in New York City, against really an incredibly difficult backdrop, and he's making great strides in ensuring that New York City continues to be the safest large city in America, and we are as community-oriented and technologically advanced as possible. And certainly, I, as a New Yorker, and certainly the New York Law School community, is incredibly grateful for all his work and the work of every member of the NYPD. So once again, it's an honor to have the commissioner here, and I will ask Ross to come back and give the formal introduction. Thanks for being here.
Commissioner, I want you to know that I'm known for very short introductions. It's very important to get people like you up to the microphone. So let me just say, Commissioner Bratton, we're delighted you're here. Born in Dorchester, Massachusetts, Boston Technical High School, University of Massachusetts at Boston with a bachelor, fellow at Kennedy School, Vietnam veteran, twice Commissioner of Police in New York City, Chief of Police in Los Angeles, Commissioner in Boston. When you look up Commissioner Bratton on Google or anything else, what it always says is that Commissioner Bratton was influenced by the broken windows theory. I think that should be turned around. I think Commissioner Bratton influenced the broken windows theory, and he did it profoundly. And his thoughts about how to police are now universally recognized. There are few people of whom it can be said they have changed the way their profession operates. Commissioner Bratton is one of those people. We're delighted to welcome you to the podium.
Thank you so much. Good morning, all. And also apologies to those in the overflow room. Hopefully the video works for you. I was greeted by one of the guests at the table I'm sitting at with the comment, "Geez, Commissioner, you look very calm being in a room full of attorneys." Well, very easy for me. I'm married to one, and I'm blessed to have been married for one many years, Ricky Kleeman, who I think is quite well known to all of you in this room. As I think about this room also, though, I'm kind of reminded of the recent events that we just went through the month of September, an extraordinary month in the history of this city and certainly the NYPD. We had the Pope's visit on top of the UN's 70th anniversary. At one point in time in our 3 square mile area, we had 170 or 90% of the world leaders in that 3 square mile area, traveling about 240 different motorized convoys, and we had the Pope. So it was a very interesting week for us, very interesting month with all the events that go on in the city at any given time. Fashion Week, a couple of teams competing to get into the World Series, a concert at the same time, 60,000 people in Central Park, a very eventful month. And as I think about this meeting this morning with all of you, a room full of lawyers and the Pope, I'm reminded of a little story about Pope and a recently deceased, very prominent attorney showing up at the pearly gates. And they're met there by St. Peter. And Peter welcomes both of them and says, "Welcome to your new home. I'm going to show you to your new residences." So they hop in with St. Peter, and off they go. And as they're going into heaven, the homes are getting more and more sumptuous and estates. And both the Pope and the lawyer commented to each other, "Why, isn't this wonderful?" And shortly thereafter, the lawyer is delivered to his new home, a palatial estate, servants meeting him. And the St. Peter says to him, "Enjoy your new home. It's all yours for eternity." And they drive off, and the Pope is sitting in the back figuring, wow, if that's what he got, I can only imagine what I'm going to get. Well, then they cross the tracks, and the quality of the housing gets less and less, and they finally pull up at a ramshackle house, and St. Peter says, "Pope, this is yours." And the Pope says, "This is mine. How come he got that, and I'm a Pope, and I get this?" St. Peter says, "Well, up here, Popes are a dime a dozen, but we don't too often get any attorneys." Sorry about that. I'm going to use some prepared remarks because there's some specific points I want to make, but I'm also going to, during the Q&A, hopefully we'll go into other areas of interest or concern to you that allow me to amplify my remarks. I would point out, however, that I'm going to draw on a number of recent publications in my remarks that are available to you on the department's many social media sites, our blogs, our web, Twitter, you name it, we're doing it. But very specifically on the NYPD website, you can get a lot of the documents I'm referencing. There's a handout here that is available, I think, to almost all of you. I think we brought sufficient copies, which is a summary of this document, the plan of action for the NYPD that we've been developing over the last 18 months. One city, safe and fair, everywhere for everyone. The synopsis and the actual document. This is the work of several thousand of our department members over these last 18 months. There's also another document that's available that I speak to very frequently and was referenced by the gentleman who introduced me. And this speaks to the issue of broken windows and quality of life policing in New York, and references also, there's another study there we have on stop, question, and frisk and its relationship to crime, up or down. So they will help to inform the comments I'll make to you this morning. And then most recently, that we are in the finalized process of developing what will be the most comprehensive use of force policies in the nation. I believe they will be the state of the art. They will be issued shortly after the first of the year. We've been introducing them to a variety of groups, and yesterday we presented them to our union leadership to get their input before we finalize issuing what is, to any police organization, probably its most important guidelines, and that's in terms of how we, under our Constitution, since we are empowered to use force, and are among the few in the nation empowered to use deadly force, it is critical that we get it right. And our intention here in the NYPD is certainly to get it right. As it relates to the comment about broken windows, I've had the good fortune of not being influenced by the George Kelly, Jim Wilson article, both of whom were close friends, the late Jim Wilson and George Kelly, who's still working with me here in New York as recently as yesterday on this issue. But I was practicing broken windows in the 1970s, well before their article. So I'm the practitioner that takes their theories and puts them into practice and into action. And it is the foundation on which I stand. And it's the foundation on which Sir Robert Peel stood in 1829 when he created the Metropolitan Police. Sir Robert Peel's 9 principles of policing. Moses had 10, Peel was able to do it in 9. And the first of those 9 principles, and if you read them today, they are every bit as relevant, maybe more relevant to the society of today than they were in 1829. Wonderful how they have stood up over time. The first one is the basic mission for which the police exist is to prevent, and I emphasize prevent, crime and disorder. He understood clearly in 1829 in London the linkage between the two. In the 70s and 80s, in this city in particular, but in this country, we did not understand that. We pretty much gave up enforcing quality of life types of offenses, and you saw the results of that. By 1990, this city and this country was a mess. The two have to be put together. But like anything, excuse me, a cook preparing a recipe, a doctor dealing with a patient, you have to do it in the right amounts to make it work. In the 70s and 80s, we didn't use it at all, and what did we end up with? Disaster. Highest crime rates in the history of the country in 1990. And so we have been bringing it back. But the balance that needs to be maintained is the subject of great discussion, as it needs to be, as it must be, because the amount of it varies from time to time depending on how well society is doing. So I wanted to make those brief comments before getting into my prepared remarks to just set the stage, because I will be referencing all of this during those remarks. And again, it's a pleasure to be here, and I thank the school for the opportunity to come in and talk about something that's very important. Our city, our country, particularly at this time, and issues that are of significant importance to both. And so much of what happens here in New York does, in fact, shape and drive where the country goes on many of these issues. So it's very important that we get them right here, because we don't just affect the 8.5 million New Yorkers, the 3 million people who come in every day to work or go to school here, as well as the 59 million tourists a year who visit us, but we have impact on the other 350 million Americans. If we get it right here, we have that potential impact. In this audience, I'm sure you'll appreciate one of my mottos: you cannot break the law to enforce the law. With that in mind, last week I announced a new use of force policy. In the summary document I talk about that will be available once we finalize them. It delineates 3 levels and prioritizes de-escalation and the sanctity of life. The national movement and discussion about de-escalation, the opposite of what police have traditionally done about moving forward forcefully. We are reshaping and redefining what we want in policing. Guardians versus warriors, guardians rather than warriors. But it also tracks the use of force against my officers. And I think that's critical. I think we have long neglected how much force is used against officers that oftentimes results in the force that we do focus on. The force used by officers oftentimes in response to resistance to arrest, oftentimes in response to officers trying to direct and control events. Because when cops use force, it's almost always in response to threats or resistance. The fact that 3 of my officers were fired upon 2 days ago, 3 officers, plainclothes, the 88 precinct, the gentrifying Williamsburg area of the city, assaulted by several individuals with guns. Just very fortunate for the 3 of them that they were not killed in that assault. That's a use of force that was in response to a threat, a very deadly threat leveled against them. In terms of dealing with force, Tracking is a key. Training, which is a key to troubleshooting officers, which is a key to transforming behavior. Let me emphasize that again. Tracking, training, troubleshooting, transforming. We saw this with officer-involved shootings. We went from 994 officer-involved shootings in 1972 in the city. Think of that. 994 officer-involved shootings in this one city with a much smaller police department at a time of much greater turbulence, certainly. In that same year, 12 New York City police officers were murdered in the streets of New York. In 2014, we had 79 officer-involved shooting incidents. That's a record low. And so far this year, we're down about 20% from that record low. So we as a police force probably use weapons less than any other major police force in this country. Keep in mind, I had 35,000 police officers, and we used firearms in 79 incidents in 2014. These declines are all about tracking, training, troubleshooting, and transforming. And on top of this, we're dealing with a lot of you, lawyers. Lawyers are a very significant part of my life, even more so in these last couple of years. We have the newly created position of Inspector General. That's something I was very familiar with in the Los Angeles Police Department, but a new concept here, a still forming concept. The recent IG report on use of force is, in some respects, a solution in search of a problem. Because our new use of force policies, which are summarized but which are very extensive, which we shared with the IG prior to his issuing the report, make most of the report's recommendations redundant. Their report is based on 179 cases out of 10,000 received by CCRB during a 5-year period, 2010 to 2014, with 2014 being the only year that I was police commissioner. That's less than 1.8% of all cases. In addition, the report takes 26 cases where it believes officers could have de-escalated and make sweeping statements about officers' ability to resolve situations in the street properly. Many of you in this room are lawyers. Some of you are in oversight capacity. You understand that reports of the kind issued by the Inspector General must be factual and not rhetorical. That's 26 cases out of 179 out of 10,000 in the 5-year period that saw activity in this department of more than 2 million arrests, nearly 2.3 million C-summonses issued, criminal summonses, and more than 20 million radio runs during that same period of time. Millions of instances in which officers did it right with no need for CCRB or force, up against 26 cases. Well, I think my officers overall, 35,000 of them, your officers, your NYPD, do pretty well in this category. Their use of force and of deadly physical force is more restrained, and I feel very comfortable saying this, than any other large city department in this nation. But we want to do better, we can do better, and we will. And the self-initiated, and I would emphasize this, self-initiated effort to change our use of force policies, it began almost as soon as I was appointed police commissioner, and was informed by my 7 years in Los Angeles under the most extensive federal consent decree ever leveled against a police department in the city, that it's informed by that experience. And so much of what we are doing are taking those state-of-the-art practices, contemporizing them for 2015 and our city, the city of New York. Also, contrary to the IG report, we are now providing unprecedented training in de-escalation, in conflict resolution, something that has become very much of an issue in the United States, and crisis intervention. Some of the best and most extensive training of that kind in the nation is now being done here in New York City in our academy. For the first time, NYPD officers this coming year will be getting more than 10 days a year of in-service type of training. And it's designed to be annually reoccurring. 2 days of firearm training each year, which has helped to reduce the use of firearms so extensively. They will be getting 3 days of in-service training on contemporary issues. This new cycle coming up will be on the new stop, question, and frisk policies developed by the Federal Monitor. It'll also be on the issues of de-escalation. 10,000 of our officers over the next year will receive 4 days of intensive training on crises intervention, on de-escalation, dealing with the mentally ill, with those afflicted by drugs. Yes, just yesterday morning, I attended classes at our academy on our new crises intervention training. As I mentioned, 4 days of in-depth role-playing with all types of experts. It was really amazing to me, and it was a way of showing officers how to handle the emotionally disturbed as well as the chemically altered, compassionately and safely. We have a very large homeless population in this city. We estimate out of the approximately 60,000 homeless, the vast majority being families, 6,000 to 7,000 single males in the homeless population. But we have about 3,000 some odd street people, service-resistant people, a number of whom are significantly disabled by emotional issues, schizophrenia, others by significant long-term drug addiction, people who are very difficult to deal with in the best of circumstances. We are training our officers during that 4-day period how to identify the schizophrenic, how to identify somebody that's on PCP, somebody that's on K2, somebody that's on heroin, because each of those issues requires a different type of de-escalation response. So we as a department are extraordinarily committed in terms of the amount of time we're going to commit to training our officers to focus on this issue, which is creating so much of the concern in this city at this particular time. It is ironic, almost a tale of two cities, as crime is at historic low levels and going down even further. This will be the safest year in the history of this city. You'd have to go back to the 1960s when we report the end-of-year crime stats to see a time when there was as little crime as there is in this city at this time with a population of 1 million more people. But because of some of the broken windows conditions that we're experiencing on the streets, some of which have been increasing numbers of homeless, increasing aberrant behavior on the part of some of those service-resistant, we have this concern, this fear, and we have this conflict. How much policing is appropriate dealing with these issues, broken windows? How much stop, question, and frisk dealing with crime? It has created a great dilemma, a great set of challenges to be faced, and one that I am certainly up to accepting and responding to and leading the department forward to address. I've never worked with a mayor in this regard who has funded me the way Mayor de Blasio has. We are fortunate at this city at this time that funding is available to do all of these programs, to spend tens of millions of dollars on training, to spend hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars on technology and facilities, and to increase the size of the police force. Now, let me speak to some of those issues. And also let's talk about some of the additional oversight that we're dealing with in the department at this time. The IG isn't the only lawyer that I work with and collaborate with. The head of the CCRB is very well known to all of you, Richard Emery, the very prominent civil rights attorney in the city. Under him, the NYPD-CCRB relationship has been reset. He's been doing a great job trying to reorganize that very critical entity that is looked to provide oversight over the NYPD in the 4 areas that they address: force, abuse, discrimination, and ethnic profiling. Cases are resolved faster and more fairly. I think the average time has gone from about 288 days down to about 80-some-odd days to handle a case, an extraordinary reduction in time to handle cases from start to finish. Complaints are also down, and I'm very proud of this. Complaints this year are down about 18% based on CCRB documentation. And there's one other law I have to mention, and that's the federal monitor. I worked in LA under one of the most stringent consent decrees in U.S. history, so I know how to cooperate and collaborate with oversight. Indeed, now in New York City, I think we rival LA if we don't surpass them in the number of oversight entities I have to deal with on a given day, including a very activist city council, a very activist comptroller, a very activist public advocate, and we are going to be soon coming into an election season where everybody gets even more active. So we'll have to deal with that. We've been working closely with the monitor, recasting our procedures and training with regard to investigative encounters. As you recall, the monitor, under the tutelage of the federal judge, is looking very specifically at the issue stop, question, and frisk. And that issue is something that I believe has largely been resolved, and the increasing additional oversight will help us on developing other policies and procedures to ensure that it stays resolved. From a high of nearly 700,000 stops in 2011, we've dropped to fewer than 47,000 in 2014, and there will be many fewer this year. But unlike some of the media, some of the pundits that predicted Armageddon would arrive with that the 4 horsemen of the Acropolis were charging over the George Washington Bridge, sorry, didn't happen. I didn't expect it to happen. They did. I think in some instances they hoped it would happen because it would allow them to drive their political agendas forward. Sometimes I'm concerned about some of that activism. The conscious effort to portray the darkest issues, to overplay them, to try to destroy the image of this city as the safest large city in the world, one of the most progressive cities in the world, and present nothing but doom and gloom. It is just the opposite of that. There's a lot of reason for optimism in this city at this particular time, and I'm an optimist, and I will continue to basically take on those who would seek to denigrate the work of this department. We're a department in transition. We have our struggles, as everybody does, but I believe we're on the right path, and I believe the city is on the right path to address the many issues of concern that have been voiced about the NYPD. But even as we've seen those stops plummet, opposite of what the pundits would have predicted, we've seen crime in the city continue to fall. In fact, the two seem to be negatively correlated. Shootings, robberies, and murders were all higher in 2010 and 11, the two highest years for stop, question, and frisk, than they were in 2013, 2014, and now 2015, each of which years has seen stop, question, and frisk steadily declining. What we believe happened wasn't random street stops. What drove shootings and murders to historic lows in 2013 and 14 and 15, and then drove murders down even lower in 2014, was targeted enforcement. A scalpel, not a buzzsaw. Commissioner Kelly began this work quietly easing off stops in 2012 and 13 and initiating targeted gang takedowns instead. I think you're all familiar with the effort he made against Cruz, and Cruz being building-specific, housing project-specific, neighborhood-specific, versus the larger gangs, the Bloods and the Crips and the Latin Kings, to give you a little bit of a definition of the term crew versus gang. We've taken those efforts even further, and we've seen historic declines in burglary and robbery. We have programs that are treating the residents of high-crime neighborhoods as allies, not potential criminals. Even the communities where crime hangs on tightest, and unfortunately there's still far too many in the city, they don't have the thousands of shootings that we had back in the 90s, 5,000 or 6,000 shootings a year. So why stop thousands of people if crime is down dramatically by almost 80%? Instead, we focus on the tiny handful of criminals. We estimate 5,000 to 6,000, and within that 5,000 to 6,000, the number of shooters is an even smaller proportion, who are causing the remaining havoc that is so much featured in our papers, in our newscasts, and unfortunately still destroys the lives of so many in so many of our neighborhoods. And I think it's been working. It's creating a mindset change in our cops. We're seeking to rebuild trust, and I'm going to get into the 5 T's in that handout that you have. We're seeking to rebuild trust, first and foremost, with the communities that we serve. Trust where we've lost it, trust where we've had it, and in all cases, to expand it. One way we're doing it is through a peace dividend in our enforcement patterns, and I use that term, peace dividend. Enforcement, arrests, C-summonses, and the stops have decreased by more than 800,000 for 2014 versus 2013, and declining even more again now in 2015. Negative interactions between our police force and the public, even as overall crime, robberies, burglaries, and murders were driven lower. Some categories of crime were still experiencing increases this year, rapes being one of them, always an area of concern. Murders are up by about, I think, 8% as of this morning, and shootings, which had been up double-digit early in the year, as we predicted, are now in the negative column going down. And the results have also seen in those lower CCRB complaint numbers I mentioned. Improved trust is also changing how we tackle crime, the second T. Isn't that the basic business for which we exist? As exemplified in our new neighborhood policing model, we are totally changing how we police this city with what we call our neighborhood policing model. We are totally reforming all of our precincts, redesigning sectors, changing how our officers work in those precincts. We begin in 2 precincts in Manhattan, the 3-4 and the 3-3. 2 precincts that in the early 90s had well over 100 murders. And I think last year between the 2 of them, they may have had 3 or 4. An amazing transformation in the modern Manhattan. We're also up and running in Queens, the 100 and 101. And this month we rolled it out in the 3-2 and the 113 and housing precinct PSA 6. The overall goal over the next year is to expand it to most of our PSAs and hopefully to maybe as many as half of our precincts. We'll expand it further after we effectively get it in place in those higher crime precincts or in those precincts in which we've had great success and want to build on that success. It hinges on steady sectors, steady assignment of officers, and giving officers time away from the radio, a couple of hours a day where they can be off the radio, meeting with, working with business leaders, school leaders, community leaders, church leaders, with the kids in those neighborhoods. We want the cops to understand the people, the problems, and the potential of the community. And I talk about the potential of the communities they serve. It also includes a new position, the Neighborhood Coordinating Officer. We'll have hundreds of them, all volunteer senior officers who, like the Senior Lead Officer program it's modeled on, from Los Angeles. A lot of what we're doing here is taking some of the best practices from LA, some of the best practices from London. I have a 5-person team in London today looking at their educational training processes to see what we can take from them to bring back. We are constantly scanning for best practices. We don't take just pride in what we do. We take pride in the police profession and its advances everywhere in trying to bring them back here to New York. Each of our sectors, and each precinct will now have 4 or 5 sectors, we'll have 2 of these volunteer NCOs, experienced cops who really get to understand and connect with the people. In commands where neighborhood policing has been piloted, the cops and the community are enthusiastic based on the focus groups and the polling that we're doing. The promise it holds was directly related to Mayor de Blasio and the City Council giving the NYPD its first headcount expansion in more than a decade. 1,297 new cops, 400 civilians that free up 400 cops, 1,697 additional cops, 500 new cadet positions that will free up the equivalent of a couple hundred more cops. So by 2016, the end of 2016, I'll have the equivalent of 2,000 more cops to staff up all these initiatives. That's the first expansion of the department since 2001. Most of you don't realize the NYPD over the last number of years shrank by 6,000 officers. All the gains made during David Dinkins, Rudy Giuliani time washed away over the last 12 years. Nobody really reported on it. Nobody paid attention. Because by and large, crime was still trending down. Despite a couple of years where crime actually went up, feeling pretty good. Crime was trending down. So this mayor, this city council, have in fact recognized that we have a need for more police to do more of this community intervention and some of the other initiatives I'll speak to. And I'd like to also go back to our third T, which is training. And I mentioned that earlier. No police department in America, none, that's going to be doing as much training in terms of revamped training of our officers in the academy, 6 months mentoring when they come out of the academy and they're not going to high-impact, high-crime precincts, unmentored 12 officers with 1 sergeant. They'll be assigned to volunteer field training officers who work with community advocates from the community, totally revamping how we select, how we train, how we mentor before those kids ever walk the streets by themselves. We also now have, as I mentioned, that full-scale field training program, almost 600 officers eventually, that will work with these young officers when they come out of the field. New officers also work with hundreds, and we hope soon to be thousands of community partners, all volunteers who want to introduce the new cops to their neighborhoods so that they know who is in the neighborhood that they need to know, the good kids from the bad kids, that they're going in more informed. On the technology front, the 4T, there is no police department in America that is as fortunate as we are at this time. Fortunate in that I have hundreds of millions of dollars for technology. There's nothing I am looking for that I am not getting in that very critical area in the 21st century. 35,000 custom-designed smartphones and custom-designed apps for every police officer, new tablets in most of our cars, 700 miles approximately of fiber optic cable being laid to ensure that every police facility has contemporary capacity, almost 30,000 new computers. You name it, we have it, body cameras that we're piloting with the Federal Monitor. We are going to be the most advanced police department in America. Many new cameras throughout our city, new license plate scanners to help us in our fight against terrorism. Thanks to District Attorney Cy Vance and the forfeiture monies he's been getting from the banks and other entities as a result of wrongdoing on their part, and the mayor taking his share and plowing it right back into law enforcement. There has never been a better time for resources than now in the history of this department. Patrol officers in the field will be able to use those smartphones to use automated foreign language translation services, access universal search capabilities, complete department forms, and even take fingerprints on those smartphones. Those smartphones, the language capabilities, by the way, we're a city of huge diversity in language. The officer will be able to hold the phone up. The person will be able to speak into it. It will translate and come back with an audio translation and a written translation, and vice versa. Just think of that in a city with 59 million tourists from all over the world, in a city where 1/4 of the people in this city come from elsewhere, and English is not the first language, and oftentimes English is not their language at all. An increased capacity to serve. By moving and sharing intelligence, the smartphones also change how we address terrorism. And terrorism is a New York phenomenon that will be with us forever. We remain the most significant terrorist target in the world in this country. That's a reality. It's because of what New York is, its vitality, its large ethnic populations, the financial capital of the world, the entertainment capital of the world, everything that the current group of terrorists that are so active hate, we represent. So they're going to continue to come at us. They come at us 16 times during Ray Kelly's time. They've come at us 4 times so far during my time. They've come at our country in other ways across the country. So we need to stay continually prepared. My predecessor did a phenomenal job building the platform I now stand on and am building upon. Because the world of terrorism has morphed terribly in the last 18 months since my appointment as commissioner. ISIS really did not exist on anybody's radar when I came into office January 2014. It has now surpassed al-Qaeda as the most significant contemporary threat, with its encouragement over social media of homegrown terrorist activity, or seeking to encourage thousands of fighters to travel to Syria where they can be trained and then return to their countries to engage in terrorist activities. They remain a force that we need to deal with, and we will continue to deal with, even while al-Qaeda attempts to continue its continuing efforts to commit large-scale actions here in the United States. We must maintain the vigilance that began under Commissioner Kelly, and I can guarantee will continue under myself and Mayor de Blasio. In that regard, that those additional almost 2,000 officers that will be available to me this year, about 450 of them are going to be added to that counterterrorism capability, specially trained, specially equipped to deal with active shooters, to be better informed, to deal with all the other threats we have. You will shortly start seeing them around the city in specially designed cars, custom designed vehicles, custom designed uniforms, and equipment to deal with a myriad of threats, whether it be an active shooter, radiation issues, any of the potential terrorist threats we have to deal with. They will be highly trained to deal with the continually expanding threat of terrorism in the world and in this city. All of this takes us back, once again, and I'll close with this, to trust. Because preventing crime and disorder, Sir Robert Peel, everything old, 1829, is new again, 2015. The idea is to keep people safe, but in keeping them safe, like a doctor, to do no harm, or to do minimum harm in a profession that is authorized under our Constitution to use force, but to only use force appropriate to the threat or the assault that we are experiencing. I am committed to ensuring that, so long as I'm police commissioner, that these 5 T's will be effectively the direction the department goes, that they will be intimately intertwined, so that as we enforce the law, we don't break it. As we enforce the law, we continually seek to train to enforce it in a more humane way. As we enforce the law, the obligation of the police, we do it in a way that builds trust rather than deteriorates it. Are we perfect? Not at all. If you can show me the perfect person, the perfect department, the perfect institution, I would like to see it. Even our democracy is constantly evolving. It is not the perfect institution that our founding fathers hoped it might be. But that is our strength also, because we evolve, we change to changing times and conditions. And we do it together. We do it in a way that we hear the dissent. We do it in a way in which we support the dissent. We do it in a way in which we protect the dissent. But we always do it in a way for the common good. And that's what we're committed to in the NYPD, the common good. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We have, we'll now open microphones. Let me just say, as is the custom, we ask the special representative of the special sponsor to make the first comment or question. So I guess that's Claude Millman. The microphones are one there, and where's the other one? On this side, all the way over there. We anticipate more than a few comments or questions, and I'd ask as a courtesy to everybody that we keep them short so that we hear more from the commissioner. On this side.
Thank you, first of all, to New York Law School, to Dean Crowell, to Professor Sandler, and also to Con Edison, Verizon, and Greenberg Traurig, who sponsored all this. We love these events. My name is Claude Millman. I'm from Castellanets and Fink. Commissioner, a few days ago, there were reports that the Department of Justice said that they would be releasing 6,000 inmates. Then on October 7th, on the Tom Sullivan radio show, former Commissioner Ray Kelly described the decision as questionable, the decision to release them, and referred to the situation as a laboratory. So I was wondering, Commissioner, whether you had views on the former Commissioner's remarks and whether or not the release is a good thing, what impact it will have, if any, on New York City.
I have very strong views and perspective on this issue. I share Commissioner Kelly's comment that effectively what is happening is in fact a laboratory. We don't know the ultimate outcome. I'm a strong supporter of the idea of releasing people from jail, particularly nonviolent, who have shown in jail good behavior. The idea that I think we all understand, whether it's the Rockefeller laws or some of the federal drug laws that were passed, that a lot of people who would have done better in treatment did not need to go to jail, and so many of them, we, with good reason, need to return. At the same time, the laboratory comment by Commissioner Kelly, 2 days ago I celebrated my 45th anniversary in this profession. I came into the Boston Police Department October 7th, one day after my 23rd birthday in 1970. And I saw over the next 10 to 15 years the well-intended effort to address the issue of the assignment of the mentally ill to asylums, huge asylums. My first police assignment was in Mattapan, that had the Mattapan State Hospital for the mentally insane, I think is the term they used back then. And I saw how those thousands of people in a well-intended effort were released, but supposedly were going to be released to neighborhood treatment centers, home care, self-treatment, and it didn't happen. They weren't funded. And what did we create? The homeless situation in the streets. I saw in the streets of Boston, as I began patrolling them, the growth in the number of people on the streets with significant mental issues, not the old alcoholics that we used to round up on Friday night with the old paddy wagons. So my concern is that, once again, a well-intended societal effort is being rushed forward without appropriate safety nets. Where are they all going to go? That should not be the disincentive not to let them out, but where are the jobs? Where's the housing? Where's the ability to allow them not to become recidivists? Because we know there's a tremendous recidivism problem at the federal level, state level. New York has led the way on this issue. It needs to be applauded. It began a long time ago. Rikers, 22,000 on average when I was police commissioner last time, 10,000 now. We have almost as many guards as Rikers as we do have inmates. State prisons are down, I think, 25, 30%. On an average day, we're receiving back into New York City, I think, 40 to 50 inmates being released from New York State prisons. They will now be added to the 6,000 federal prisoners that are soon to be, I think the number is almost 50,000, that they would seek to let out as the judges handle it. But my comment about the federal level, where are the parole officers going to be? Because these people are all being paroled. We are in a continuing state of resolution in Congress where they can't hire. They don't have enough parole officers for what they have currently. So effectively, who's going to oversee these 6,000, ultimately 40 or 50,000, when Congress can't even fund it, and Congress is now at risk of shutting down once again, looking at the fiasco that's going on down there currently. So my concern, as echoed by Commissioner Kelly, from the law enforcement side of it is, it is a laboratory, well-intended, but with potentially unintended consequences for these people coming out, not being able to find jobs, not finding adequate housing, not, in a sense, being accepted back into the communities which they left 8, 10, 12, 15 years ago. It's an issue that needs a lot more discussion, debate, and understanding. I intend to be part of that. I attended the AG's conference in Washington 2 days ago. I'm attending a conference in Washington next Wednesday, and hopefully there's an opportunity to meet potentially with President Obama on this issue on Thursday, because it is an issue of great importance to this city and to this country. If we're going to do it, let's do it right. Otherwise, it might create what the 1970s did with the mentally ill. We did not do those people any good service by putting them out on the streets. that we now, effectively 40 years later, we see them, many of them are still on those streets. Thank you for that question.
Thank you.
Good morning, Commissioner. My name is Charles Komanoff. I work with the Safer Streets Group, a pedestrian advocacy group called Right of Way. And I want to ask you about an underutilized resource at the NYPD in the Highway Division. As you know, for every fatal traffic crash in the city and a number of near fatals, so maybe 300 or 400 cases a year, the Collision Investigation Squad goes to the site and does some pretty impressive forensics to try to reconstruct what happened, who did what, how fast was the vehicle going, why did the car end up on the sidewalk, or if the pedestrian was crossing mid-block, how fast was the vehicle going to cause
I think we understand all the things they
Okay.
do. Okay.
Well,
Seriously, in the interest of time.
okay. These reports, however, they kind of go down the memory hole. There's no digest by the Highway Division to look back at a year's worth of fatalities, of analyzing what were the root causes. The public health community, which is eager to have this information, is denied it. The activist community, citizens who want to have some sense of why these things are happening and why they weren't adjudicated in a more aggressive way. So I'm here to ask, will the NYPD change its policy and begin to release the Collision Investigation Squad's report so that the public health community and the citizens at large can have this resource and make efficient use of it?
What the gentleman is referencing, as I think you're all aware, the mayor has a major collaborative effort, Vision Zero, which has shown great success during the 2 years of his time in office. Pedestrian deaths, traffic fatalities, as reported yesterday, are down significantly in a city that, considering we have 8.5 million people and 59 million tourists who are not used to utilizing our streets, has made great strides in this area. We're investing hundreds of millions of dollars in street redesign. I have recently increased the size of my highway division so we can in fact do the investigations that he's talking about. We used to only investigate fully fatalities, and oftentimes fatalities occur weeks and months after the fact. We now investigate all serious collisions as part of Vision Zero. So the effort that he's talking about is the idea of, as we develop more comprehensive information, how do we actually share it? To information sitting in a drawer is just that, information. When it's analyzed, we make intelligence out of it. When we make intelligence out of it, we make action, take action with it. So your point is well taken. I'll follow up on that particular issue, but it is still a very successful work in progress, and one that I think we should all take great pleasure in, that it's a government initiative that really is paying great dividends in terms of lives saved. Thank you.
Thanks to the center and to the commissioner for an excellent presentation and program. My question is about the small number of bad apples and whether you are revamping your screening and recruitment policies to ensure that some of these folks who clearly should not have been given a weapon and put in a position of where they could exercise force, but are prone to excessive force, are out there. I don't know how much of a problem it is. We only hear about the worst cases, obviously, but what's being done about that?
Let me speak to that. We have 35,000 officers that we have one of the more exhaustive selection processes in the country in terms of psychological screening, background screening, that some get in, unfortunately, that should not. Then others, once they're in, develop habits that they should not develop either. We have, based on, once again, my experience in the LAPD, where a major focus there was on just this issue, the bad apple, if you will, that the few among the many, how to identify them. One, to keep them out, and two, if they do come in, how to identify them more quickly. So we have recently, during my 2 years, created a risk management unit. I think it's now up well over 100 some odd people, that modeled after the same one I had in LA that was under the federal consent decree. We have created a force investigation division that investigates, as part of the new use of force policy, 50 detectives who very specifically, exhaustively investigate every use of firearm that the department engages in, including the shooting I referenced earlier. So that if you look at the totality of all that we're doing in the NYPD, the reformation of this, it is intended to keep those out who should not come in, but more early on identify those who need additional training, or in some instances, basically should not be police officers in the first place. So working closely with CCRB rather than fighting with them, we are able to jointly identify some of these more problematic officers earlier. With the risk management unit, through other oversight that we have, we're able to identify other issues that the CCRB might not want to cross. And we're working very closely with the comptroller, for example, on lawsuit issues, so that that area where lawsuits are coming in that oftentimes the police department was not even informed of, that and where payments were made for behavior of officers. We are now working with Zach Carter on the city attorney side. He has now hired 40 to 50 attorneys to more exhaustively investigate those lawsuits and collaborate with us. So we're trying to create a seamless web of identification of problem employees to very quickly retrain them where appropriate, or in some instances discharge them. So we are committed to that, and it is informed again by the 7 years of experience I had in the LAPD under the monitorship of the federal government in that location.
Thank you.
Good morning, Commissioner.
What is it about the right side of the room and the left side? There was nobody at the coffee line over here. You had a line around the block, and you have a big, is there a line of demarcation in the middle here? That, sorry, some of you, I'd sneak over to this side.
David Moog from District Council 37. With the rise of ISIS and ISIS attacking cultural institutions, how much coordination does the NYPD have with cultural institutions such as the Metropolitan Museum, since these institutions draw attendances greater than most sporting events? For example, Metropolitan Museum gets 7 million people attending events at the Metropolitan Museum. What coordination do you have with the internal security at Metropolitan?
We have, and I'm very proud of this, it's something that my predecessor created, Ray Kelly, on issues specifically around security major events. We have a number of organizations where the security directors, we have the SHIELD initiative, security directors from thousands of entities in the New York region, part of our network of instant reach out in times of concern, in preparation for example, the run-up to the UN, the Pope's visit, that we had meetings that we brought them all in. The Met that we would deal with on issues as important as major events, extra security certainly, terrorism or otherwise, demonstrations, and something as mundane as the number of vendors lined up in front of the Met as to are they there legally, are they in the right spots at the right time. So the department spends a lot of time and energy on coordination, not just with cultural institutions around the city, but with business institutions. And an example of that is our domain awareness program, also created during Commissioner Kelly's time, that will be expanding greatly and expanding fairly dramatically in Times Square as we address that issue. And that's the camera systems. We have over 8,000 interlocking cameras from private security, government institutions that we monitor. I can monitor every one of them up in my office, actually, because they are so networked. And we're going to expand that dramatically so that we, again, have a seamless web of ability to, whether we're dealing with an event or dealing with a threat, that we have that ability to force multiply very quickly.
Thank you.
Jump in a second.
Okay, please.
We're going to end on time, so just the people standing will ask questions. And I ask again that you be short so that everybody gets a chance.
Good morning, Commissioner. Chris Ferguson from Castellanos and Fink. Commissioner, you spoke earlier about the department's technology efforts, and also you mentioned, as part of that, body cameras. And I was wondering what your view is on police officers using body cameras to record all interactions with, when there's an interaction between an officer and a citizen. And also, as part of that, what the department plans to do with the proliferation of video recording, either just on street corners or by officers in terms of retrieving that data, storing that data, et cetera.
Let me speak to both issues, the issue of use of body cameras locally and nationally, as well as the unresolved issue of what do you do with all this stuff. That in the case of New York, our movement toward body cameras, which I'm totally supportive of, American police leaders, and in fact most American police unions are supportive of. But going back to Commissioner Kelly's term of laboratory, this is a unresolved set of issues, the policies, the procedures, who gets to see it, who doesn't, what do you record, when do you record it, extraordinarily complex. We are actually going to benefit by the fact that our initiative, I have a pilot initiative up and running to just test it prior to the federal monitor coming into place. Our effort is now going to be controlled by the federal monitor. and in terms of what are the policies, the procedures, what about storage, access, so that our partner going forward on this issue will be the monitor under the control of the federal judge. The benefit to us is that's going to go slowly. There's a lot of departments around the country are rushing headlong into this with no full understanding of the ramifications, because this is still so new. The idea of, is this information foilable? What are you going to do to store it? The come on here is the cameras cost about $400 on average. But then you have the monthly service charge, then you have the storage charge, then you have the retrieval charge. Take a look at your cell phone bill or your cable TV bill, all those little charges. We estimate if we move toward equipping all of my active street officers, uniform, plain clothes, you're talking about 20,000 officers. Recording based on some of the experiences in other cities, 2-4 hours of video a day. The sheer volume, I don't know if there's a cloud big enough to basically hold it all. We estimate that this is something that can run potentially into ultimately hundreds of millions of dollars each year for the city of New York. We're committed to it because I think it's going to resolve a lot of the tension between citizen and police, he said, she said. But fortunately, because we are in fact working with the federal monitor, we will be going slowly and watching what others are doing, what's successful and what's not successful. And I happen to think it's like when two-way radios were first introduced. I didn't get my first walkie-talkie till 1972 or 73. And we didn't want to carry the damn things because they weighed about 4 pounds. You don't get a cop in America that wants to go out without a radio today. Same for body cameras. It'll be the same thing, that there will not be a cop in America in a few years that won't want to have it on them.
Good morning. Adrian Untermeyer, Deputy Director of the Historic Districts Council. I hope you don't call me a hippie when I ask this question, but what are some things that architects, planners, other people who are concerned about urban space can do to reduce and prevent crime?
I'm sorry, the architects and planners about what I missed the...
How to reduce crime, how to prevent crime in public spaces.
Oh, how about dealing with crime in public spaces? A lot of that has to effectively go to the so-called broken windows theory, if you will, which is so much of that is focused on public space, the idea of shared public space, the idea that in our democracy we all give up certain freedoms for the common good. So the idea is each community really, Times Square is a clear example of that, the current debate around the painted ladies, the Elmos, that you name it, we have it. And so there's part of the debate about what can we arrive at for the common good. I think the proposal that myself and Carl Weisbrod gave to the mayor, with a lot of input from a lot of organizations, is a way forward. And I like Commissioner Kelly's term. I'm going to basically start using that, laboratory. We have quite a laboratory with a lot of petri dishes in Times Square that's being set up over the next year. So we'll look at each of those petri dishes and see how they turn out.
Good morning, Commissioner. Thank you so much for speaking this morning to us. My name is Lorna Shannon. I'm from a group called Occupy Weed Street. Cannabis legalization.
Sorry, Occupy, what is the last?
Occupy Weed Street. We're an educational coalition that supports marijuana legalization throughout the state of New York and the country, as well as the world.
Oh, Occupy Weed, W-E-E-D? Correct. Okay, I thought you were talking drain weed. Okay, all right.
No. Talking herbal remedies.
I was about to send out my counterterrorism teams to all the drain weeds that...
If I may. Cannabis legalization in Colorado, as well as in Portugal, proves that ending cannabis prohibition reduces violent crime, as well as teen usage of cannabis itself and addiction to other illegal drugs, as well as rates of HIV and other STDs. Brooklyn DA Ken Thompson is no longer prosecuting for cannabis possession. City Council Speaker Melissa Mark Viverito.
May I ask you to get to the question, please?
Yes, I am just about there. Thank you. The New York City Council colleagues advocate regulating and taxing cannabis. The science of legalization utterly debunks your scientifically archaic gateway drug theory. My question to you, sir, why won't you make cannabis-related offenses the NYPD's lowest level of law enforcement priority? And will you please reconsider your stance on cannabis reform and consider working with drug policy reformers like NORML and LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition and the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws?
We have been significantly reforming over the last 2 years during my time with Mayor de Blasio, this city council, our marijuana-related enforcement policies, to the extent that we changed that, similar to what the Brooklyn DA was doing, that we no longer seek to arrest for possession of the drug. If you're smoking it in public, we will potentially arrest you, although we're encouraging officers to use the scale that they are authorized to use of wanting admonition, summons, arrest if necessary. So the numbers of summons arrests in the city, summons and arrests are down dramatically from what they were. I talked about that peace dividend of the 800,000. I have long been a strong advocate of controlled use of marijuana for medicinal purposes, not just randomly giving it out. I am a strong opponent of legalization of marijuana because I believe strongly that it is a gateway drug, and I know that's a subject of great debate.
It has been scientifically debunked, sir, if you may.
Okay, we're not going to get in the debate. You
apologize.
ask me a question, I'm giving the answer, and basically my position on it. So that we have become, in policing, and in this city, certainly more liberal relative to that, but the debate continues and will continue with the city council as it seeks to make its changes. And so it's a good debate to have. The Colorado and Washington initiatives are good ones, like body cameras elsewhere to watch for what works, what doesn't work. And also the idea that we tend to think of marijuana in its smoking form. As you're well aware, that the issue of edible marijuana is one that's causing great concern because of the unknown amount of substance in the brownie or the cookie. So we're a work in progress on that one. I had the unique experience the other morning of walking, I was down in Wall Street, I just had a meeting down there, 8:30 in the morning, walking along the streets. Streets were packed with people, as they always are on Wall Street. And all of a sudden, there it is, that smell. And I said, what the hell, this is 8:30 in Wall Street. And I had one of my officers with me, and we're walking along, the smell's going away, and I turn it on, and he says, where the hell is that coming from? And so I'm looking around, and we come up to a red light, the pedestrian light that you can't cross. I'm standing there, and directly in front of me is this young woman, happily puffing away on her way. She's got her earphones in and a school bag that on her way to one of the local schools. And so my security officer came up on one side, I come up on the other, and tapped him on the shoulder. And she looked over, and I wish I had a photograph of that face. That in terms of, because she instantly recognized me. And
But she wasn't
so
hurting anybody,
we
was
politely
she?
removed the marijuana, threw it into the local sewer, and just suggested that she might have a better academic day without the influence of that on the way to school.
I highly doubt that. Thank you for answering my question, Commissioner.
Only in New York, kid. What is that Cindy Adams says, only in New York, kids? Yeah.
Maria Marai, attorney. Tell me, Commissioner, how can citizens assist law enforcement in identifying potential recruits to ISIS and to slow down or prevent the radicalization of the potential recruits?
Okay, I'm going to apologize that I did not hear some of that question.
Okay.
Did you?
How can the
No,
citizens...
my hearing is not
No,
the
no.
best.
How can citizens assist law enforcement in identifying potential recruits to ISIS?
Oh, okay. How can citizens assist police in identifying recruits to ISIS? Thank you. Great question. You hear this expression all the time, see something, say something. It's become almost kind of trite because we see it. But I'll tell you that a study that was done a few years ago indicated that 75% of the detection of terrorism-related cases at that time, at the time of the study, were the result of a police officer, oftentimes one who had been trained specifically to watch for signs of potential terrorism, as well as the public who just noticed a change in behavior or something that was of suspicion to them. So see something, say something is still where we get some of our best intelligence. The idea, a family notices that a child is all of a sudden changing their behavior. They're spending all their time in front of that computer. So many of what we've seen recently in terms of some of these shooting incidents, somebody noticed a change in behavior and saw it but didn't say something. And the best way is for 350 million of us to be aware and not to be afraid, but understand that there's a common good here in the sense of being mindful that the world has changed, and we need to change with it, and we need to find ways to get them before they get us. Fortunately, we've been doing pretty good at it so far. Okay,
And
thank you for that
whom
question.
shall we call when we see something suspicious?
In terms of to see something, say something, it's as easily as calling your local police station. Not 911 unless there's something actually happening, but through 311 or the local precinct station house in New York, where we have so many of them, that those numbers are certainly available. So I would strongly encourage that. Yes, sir. Last but not least, thank you for your patience.
Thank you for joining us. My name is Martin Heilweil. I was a quantitative criminologist early in my career. I go back to the Rockefeller drug laws and evaluating the predicate felony provisions and impact on prisons, prison population increase. I read the statistics in the newspaper, and as a statistician and a criminologist, one of the issues is the underreporting rate in crime. Way back when I was there, the homicide rate was considered the most reliable because you had a body. And other crimes, the reporting rate was variable. So my question is, if homicide is up and shootings are up and other crimes are down, how do we know what the reporting rate is? That's my question, sir.
Homicides, as you're aware, because we usually do have a body, we don't have a police cemetery, as my late great Jack Maple used to say, where we hide the bodies. That a
remember
body
Jack
may be hidden for years, but we're pretty good at working with the medical examiner on making a determination that we have a homicide, and that oftentimes we'll lean in that direction. So the homicide accuracy, shooting accuracy, in the vast majority of instances, you get shot, you're going to go to the hospital. So we have pretty accurate statistics there. Shootings in this city are down, as of this morning, about 1.5%. Indeed, an aberration around the country right now is some cities have homicides up, shootings down, shootings up, homicides down. It doesn't square. But there are other areas where we have significant accuracy. Stolen cars, case in point, most of them are insured or they're rental cars, so pretty good accuracy there. The soft numbers, as you know, historically have been domestic violence, have been rape. Thus the efforts to encourage the reporting of that. What we rely on, as you would be aware, is the consistency over time. And then we have the duality of the National Victims Survey, which somewhat mirrors, in many instances, ups and downs going forward. It's an inexact science, but based on now in our case, we first started in, I think, the 50s or 60s, starting to really track with UCR, national crime. And then in the 90s, we really began with CompStat in this city, revolutionized the focus on crime and the intimate focus on it, and also the transparent focus on it. So I'm very comfortable that the crime that we report, oftentimes preliminary till we finalize, is to the best of our capabilities at this time accurate. And on that trending time, 3, 5, 10, 15 years now, we feel pretty comfortable when I say that this will be the safest year in the history of the city. That's based on index crime, the 7 major categories of crime, in which index crime this year will end up the year, we were hoping to get it under 100,000, but the trending right now is probably 101, 102,000. But that will be the lowest amount of reported crime going back now to the 1960s, and that's with 8.5 million people, 59 million tourists. 2 examples. Subway, 6 million riders a day, 3.5 million riders back in my day, 1990. On average, 50 or 60 reported serious crimes back then, 22 murders. This year, we're averaging about 6 reported crimes a day, 1 per million. Times Square, some days in Times Square, 500,000 people on the streets above, 300,000 people in the subways below. Some days we have no reported crime in Times Square. The biggest hotspot in Times Square is in front of that Revlon sign. And the biggest crime problem we have there is people coming up groping people who are so intent on taking selfies of themselves, they don't realize somebody's grabbing their butt while they're taking that photo. Seriously, we actually worked with the Revlon company to change the hours on that because the witching hour is 8 o'clock at night. After 8 o'clock, they came out, the predators, and we arrested a whole bunch of them. So you'll see that sign now shuts off at 8 o'clock. It's basically, analysis statistics and what's going on. We live, I know that it's very popular in some of our media to portray this city as somehow or another slipping back. I'm sorry. I walk the same streets, ride the same subways as you do, have a much higher intimacy with what's going on. This is, in some respects, boomtown in this city. that in so many areas, look, you get into Brooklyn, you get up to the Bronx. Is it perfect? It's never going to be perfect. There's always going to be criminals. But a question around this room before we end, that how many of you actually live in the city of New York in this room? Okay. Of those of you in the city of New York, just raise your hands. If you've been the victim of a crime this past year, and I'm talking the 7 crimes we normally categorize, you've obviously not been the victim of a murder. You're here. And I would hope not of a significant assault, but we have the rapes, the robberies, the larcenies, the stealing of a smartphone, stolen car. How many of you in the room have basically experienced that type of crime within the last year? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In a room of how many people? God, we're in an awful crime wave, aren't we? Have a good day.
Thank you all. Before we end, I want to do 2 things. One, I just want to acknowledge George Grasso, former First Deputy of the Police Department, is here. And
An even better judge.
yeah, an even better judge, says Bill Bratton. And then Michael Armstrong, who was the counsel to the Knapp Commission many years ago.
Not to mention another inspection engineer.
Yeah. As we always do, we'd like to give a gift from the law school to our speakers, and it's always a product of the law school. This is a new book by my colleague Michael Roffer, The Law Book. It's a wonderful book about all the various instances of law. I give it with gratitude. This has been an extraordinary morning. We are very lucky to have Commissioner Bratton as the police commissioner.